Cheers and hello and welcome to the second of these Facebook Q&A sessions, and apparently the first one was so popular that we're doing it again, and same again. Rob here, who you can't see behind the camera, has collated some questions that you sent into the Facebook page and is going to be master of ceremonies. So without further ado, Rob, question one.
We had a lot of questions, but here's the first one. The new record, from what I've heard so far, seems to bridge the progressive and pop world in a seamless way. While progressive rock fans have been predominantly male in the past, females are quickly gaining in numbers. Do you think the new record will attract more women to your work, and how do you feel about blurring the lines between prog and pop? It's from Stacey.
Well, firstly about attracting, God, I hope so. I think at the end of the day, I've always had a relatively healthy sort of female demographic in my audience, but there's no question that I think the more accessible the material gets, the more the kind of gender balance becomes more even, and obviously I welcome that very much. And of course there's a strong female sensibility in the music with the female singers that I've used on the last couple of records, and the fact that Hand Cannot Raise was written from the perspective of a female character, and I think that definitely appealed very much to a female audience, more so, yeah.
Alright, here's a question from Robin. He says, "Hi Stephen, I remember in an interview last year you mentioned how you feel that artists interacting with their audiences too much can strip away some of the mystery from music making, thus taking out some of the magic. My question is, in today's world of social media-led promotion, are artists at a point where they have no choice but to interact with their fans more and break down more barriers in order to succeed?"
I think, like all these things, is a question of balance. I mean, I've embraced social media because to me it's an incredible way for me to be able to reach, an audience when I don't get a lot of radio play and I don't get any TV coverage, and I'm, to some extent I'm invisible in the mainstream. So to me, social media has been incredible, but at the same time there's a line at which I think it's important not to cross. I think most people don't know a lot about me as a private person. My private life is very much my own. I don't have a personal Facebook page. I have a professional Facebook page, and that's amazing for me to get information out, news, and also to share some of my, passions, whether it's movies I like or other music I like. But you won't read a lot about my personal life. Not that there's anything interesting to say about it anyway. But I think that's an important thing. I think sometimes there's too much sort of tittle-tattle, white noise and nonsense that has nothing to do with the art, and of course just because somebody enjoys my music doesn't mean they're entitled to know stuff that has nothing to do with the artistic side.
Yeah. Here's a question from Marlon. He says, "Your first 3 pre-releases from To The Bone have stirred fierce debates among your fans on social media, both positive and negative, regarding the more pop music tone revealed so far. What do you think about that?"
I think that's a very healthy thing. I think that the most important thing for me is to always feel like I'm evolving as a musician and as an artist, and I think it's very important to confront the expectations of the existing audience. Now, I'm realistic. I don't expect everyone to like this new record, and it may be that for some people it's just gone a different direction they don't appreciate, but I think that's been a constant throughout my career. There's been certain records which have been very controversial when they came out. Stupid Dream was a controversial one many years ago. In Absentia was a very controversial one because it introduced a metal aspect to my sound, which some people hated at the time, So I think I'm used to those kind of periods in my career where a particular album I expect to lose some fans but maybe hopefully gain some new ones. And I think that's a sign of someone that, I'm not saying I'm a great artist or anything, but I certainly have the sensibility of an artist as opposed to the sensibility of an entertainer, in that I can't really think about trying to please my existing audience, and neither can I think about just repeating a winning formula. I don't believe that's the way a truly creative person works. All the people I admire the most from history, whether it's Bowie or Zappa or Kate Bush or Prince, these are people or Neil Young, these are people that constantly kind of evolved and challenge the expectations of their audience. And rightly or wrongly, I've always felt that's what I wanted to be too.
Yeah. All right, Trey asks, do you find yourself listening to any modern pop acts, and if so, who are they?
Well, modern pop, as in really mainstream modern. I mean, to be honest, I have a problem with most modern pop, and that it's that so much of it seems to be in thrall to American R&B, to the point of almost complete dominance. And I'm not a huge fan of American R&B. I mean, I like some classic stuff, you know, Prince and that kind of stuff. But modern pop seems to be so influenced by American R&B, which is a sound I'm not particularly, you know, thrilled about, almost to the complete detriment of any influence from rock or pop music, that it doesn't really appeal to me a lot. You know, I hear the odd song. I love Daft Punk, for example. I don't know if that's, I mean, even they've been around for 20 years now. That's not really modern, is it? I really like this band called Cigarettes After Sex. They've just released their first album. But again, that's not really pop, you know. Depends on your definition of pop, you know.
Yeah. All right, Katie asks, in this polarising culture of the internet and social media, what are your thoughts about creating music that clearly links to topical hot lava issues, e.g. the refugee crisis, the rise of alternative facts and truths?
I've always written about, you know, what I've seen happening around me, you know, and on the earth and in my private life and all that stuff. That's kind of that's the little bit of a window to my private life that you do get, you know, through the songs. But I think, you know, it would be a very obvious thing to say that the world is a very different world to the one in which I wrote Hand Cannot Raise. You know, only 2.5 years ago, and things are almost completely different. You know, we're now post-Brexit, we're in the Trump era, we've had terrorism very much come to you know, live right amongst us. I'm talking about myself in Europe here now and in the UK. So everything has changed. And I think for me to have not kind of touched on those things and referred to those things, I wouldn't say it would have been irresponsible, but it certainly would have been strange not to have at least referenced those things. And I think, you know, one of the good things I think that's come out, if there can be a good thing that's come out of this situation, is that I'm hoping that there will be a new generation of kind of protest music, or you know, music that's angry about these things, whether it's my record or the Depeche Mode album or Roger Waters' album. And also some young bands, a band like Idol, there's a young band called Idols, that's very angry, you know. And I think great pop music and rock music historically, you know, did come out of a sense of protest and anger, whether it's hip-hop music or folk music. That's the music of protest. So if there is a kind of silver lining to this whole situation now, I think that might be it. We'll hopefully see music with a bit more fire and bite to it coming out.
All right, Karthik says, what was the reception like for To The Bone at the private listening session party? What do your friends and colleagues think of it?
So far, I mean, everyone who I've played it to has been very positive and very encouraging. The people at the playback seem to like it. You know, one thing I've found is that, and I found this over a long period of time, almost, you know, going right back to the beginning of the days when tracks used to be released prior to an album release. Taking one song or even 2 or 3 songs out of context just doesn't really work. Yeah. And I find that time and time again. You know, when Perfect Life was taken from Hand Cannot Raise as the sort of opening sort of preview track from that album, I think that confused a lot of people as well.
Yeah, it did.
It was the most electronic thing on the record, and, you know, kind of my favourite track in a way, but it's obviously completely misleading to hear pieces of the jigsaw puzzle taken out of context of the album. The album, all I would say is the album is as ambitious and sophisticated as anything I have done. And when you hear it as a complete kind of musical arc, musical journey, I think it will make a lot more sense. But that's part of the problem with, you know, preview tracks and all that kind of thing.
Yeah. Christine asks, is there going to be a documentary of the recording sessions for To The Bone?
Yes, it's on the Blu-ray. It's 90 minutes long. I couldn't sit through it. But Lasse was basically filming all the sessions right from the beginning to the end. And it's exhausting for me to watch because it's like reliving the whole process of making the record. But I think if you're interested in that kind of thing, it's kind of the motherlode, you know. It's like a feature film length, and it has almost everyone that's on the record is kind of like featured at some point in that film, and it will definitely give you an insight into the whole sort of drawn out process of making the record. Yeah.
Right. Sarah asks, what was it like to work with XTC's Andy Partridge on the new record?
Amazing. And Andy, as some of you guys probably know, is one of my heroes. I mean, XTC is one of my favourite bands of all time, basically. You know, it's definitely in the top 5. You know, and one of the top 5, and it's a privilege and an honour to be able to work. Obviously, to be able to work with one of your, you know, your idols, someone whose music is in your very DNA. And my XTC influence has come out over the years anyway. So to be able to actually work with Andy on the title track of the album was amazing. You know, Andy took it very, very seriously, as I expected he would. He was calling me every time he had a new line. He was calling me out and said, "I've got a new line." He was reading it to me, and I was like, "Okay, can we do this?" And he went away and he would revise and he would keep coming back to me, and he took it very seriously and came up with an absolute cracking lyric, which for me is kind of the fundamental sort of lyric of the whole record. You know, it's all about the nature of truth as a kind of flexible notion, and what is truth, and can we ever really, you know, understand what truth is in this day of fake news.
Mm-hmm. Rhiannon asks, were there any specific influences visually or musically during the making of the video for Song of I?
Well, basically the main idea of that was I wanted to work with this performance artist who I'd come across on the internet, Maya Petrovna. I thought she was extraordinary, very dramatic, very theatrical, and I think it had to be the right song. And Song of I is a very dramatic song. It seemed to work very well just to do it in a very small enclosed space, to keep that sense of, you know, claustrophobia, allow her to kind of do what she does, which I say is very theatrical, and to kind of play off her in that sense by being almost being the opposite, being very kind of static. Mm-hmm. So she really, seeing stills of her work and seeing videos that she'd made previously, not pop videos, but videos just of her theatre productions and stuff, was kind of the inspiration. I said to Lasse, we really need to do something, you know, with Maya, and you know, that was the starting point really. The kind of look and the image and the kind of approach that she already had.
Mm-hmm. Wilfredo asks, is Pariah a homage to Don't Give Up by Peter Gabriel and Kate Bush?
Well, kind of that, and Women in Chains. I think it's Woman in Chains. Woman in Chains by Tears for Fears. That idea of the big kind of 80s epic duet, you know, but dealing with very, in some ways, very dark subject matter, you know. Certainly, both Peter Gabriel and Tears for Fears were touchstones for me on this record, along with people like Kate Bush and Talk Talk and Prince, Depeche Mode. You know, these very, very ambitious subjects that were being dealt with in what are essentially quite accessible pop songs. To me, that was really the fundamental thing that I wanted to try on this record. So I would say, yes, certainly that was a conscious influence, along with the Tears for Fears duet. Yeah.
Joe asks, what is your favourite song on the new album?
I don't really have favourites. I mean, I'm really proud of the whole record. There's one song in some ways that I'm more proud of than any other, which is Permeating, which is going to be the first proper single release from the album, which is by far the most, I would say, the most joyous song I've ever written. I'm not known for my joyous pop songs. It's like I was doing an interview earlier this morning with a journalist, and he said to me, referring to Permeating, he said, "What took you so long to bring your ABBA influence out?" and I don't know why, because ABBA is another of my top 5, you know, favourite bands of all time, and they are also my musical DNA. And for some reason, I guess I've always gravitated more towards the melancholic material. Mm-hmm. But this time around, I've pulled off something that I never thought I would be able to pull off, which is a glorious piece of joyous pop music, and it's probably going to be quite divisive with the fans again, as it has been so far with the people that have interviewed me. Some people absolutely love it, and some people don't get it at all, which is fair enough. I think that's, again, a healthy sign. So in that respect, because it's such not a stretch for me, but certainly a new aspect, a new bow to my instrument, if you like, I think I'm kind of most proud of that one right now, yeah.
Damien asks, will To The Bone be played in its entirety on the forthcoming tour, and what can we expect from the set list?
I think I'm going to try and play most of it. I'm not going to play it from beginning to end, at least not for the first leg. There'll be older tracks interspersed between the tracks off the new record. Do you know what? Until I actually try rehearsing the songs with the new band, I don't know how well they're going to work. Some of them may not work, and that's always a possibility. that some of them may simply not transfer into the live environment. But certainly I've got a lot of ideas for visuals, new films, and I want to take the show up a notch in terms of the kind of spectacle, and make it even more immersive and spectacular than ever.
Yeah, brilliant. Edvardo asks, are you watching the new Twin Peaks?
I've seen 4 episodes. I've been away doing promo in Europe, so I've missed a few episodes. I'm a bit behind. I've seen 4 episodes. All I'll say is this, that... Okay, firstly, I love it, obviously. Secondly, I'll say that when you actually see the real thing... You know, people have compared many of these shows over the last 20 years to David Lynch. You know, one of the cliches you see sometimes is it's very Lynchian, you know, whether it's a show like The Leftovers or something like that. When you actually see the real thing, you realise he's just on another level completely in terms of the way his imagination works. I don't think all of it works, but I'm absolutely fascinated by all of it, and I absolutely applaud any mainstream television that is that ambitious and that experimental. I think has got to be a good thing, and some of it I think is absolutely extraordinary.
Daryl says, your music is a central focus for the upcoming video game Last Day of June. Did you have any input with any of the production of it, and have you had a chance to play it for yourself?
I haven't played it, but I've seen someone else play it. I wouldn't know how to play a computer. I've never played a computer game in my life. The simple answer is I had nothing to do with it at all, except for 2 years ago when the company approached me and said, we'd like to make a computer game based on Drive Home and the characters that Hayao Muller created and that Jess later used in the video. And of course I said, sure, you know, why not? Nothing to lose. And I didn't really have any conception of what something like that would look like. You know, my idea of computer games in my mind, I guess, was like, you know, shooting things and car chases and that stuff, which I guess a lot of it is, you know, like that. But I was, about a month ago, I was invited to see the final game and I was blown away. It's so beautiful and it's so cinematic and it's so moving. I mean, I knew the story of the song already, you know, but even I found, just watching this guy playing it, it was so emotionally engaging in a way that I just didn't realise computer games could be. So I really learned something, you know, about what's possible with, you know, with computing. It you know, it feels to me more like a movie than it does a computer game. It's like a movie that you just happen to be one of the characters in, and that, I guess that's, you know, people already knew that play computer games. I didn't, because my memory of computer games is like playing, you know, Space Invaders in 1983 or whatever. So I guess things have come on a touch since then.
Ian asks, as a producer yourself, what are your favourite albums from a production perspective and why?
Tears for Fears, Seeds of Love, I think is one of the best sounding records ever made, and that was a big influence on this record. Most of Trevor Horn's productions in the 80s I'm a big fan of. I mean, something like Dark Side of the Moon, it's not my favourite Floyd album. I'd be quite happy if I never hear it again, to be quite honest. Not because it's almost over familiar, but I have to acknowledge it's one of the most beautiful sounding records ever made. So I guess in that sense that's also in my DNA, in the sense that I did grow up in a house where my father listened to that record a lot. It's a perfect sounding record, and I think it's something that you know, almost every rock record made ever since, certainly in the conceptual rock area, has kind of aspired to sounding as good as that, you know. So there's a few records.
Coming back to Permeating now, Alex asks, what inspired the decision to feature Bollywood dancers in the video?
I love Bollywood. I've loved Bollywood dancing for a long time. It's one of the most joyous things you can see. If you just see traditional Bollywood dancing, and by the way, as a kind of slightly as a sidebar to this, when I decided I wanted Bollywood dancing in the Permeating video, the first thing we did, was myself and Lassa did, was we looked at traditional, you know, dancers in India. We thought we could go and actually shoot it in India. The problem is that a lot of the Bollywood dancers in India now are very influenced by American hip-hop culture. And to me, it didn't have the traditional vibe that I wanted. So it was ironic that we ended up shooting it with a London-based Bollywood troupe who had a lot more of what I associate as being the true kind of spirit of Bollywood dancing. It's so joyous. I mean, I defy anybody to watch Bollywood dancers and not break out with a big grin on your face. It's just got so much passion and so much sort of joy in it, and actually it just works so well with the song. At least I think it does. I haven't seen the finished video yet.
Yeah. Rui asks, when you were in Chile, you posted a clip on Instagram at an abandoned graveyard, and you mentioned that you had been to some really strange places on your travels. If you had to choose just 3 strange places beside the graveyard, which ones would you choose?
Well, the first one that comes to mind is the Island of the Dolls in Mexico City, which is really a creepy place in the best possible sense of the word. An island that is entirely populated by decaying, rusting dolls with cobwebs and other various mould on them. Hundreds and hundreds of them in this very small island in the middle of this part of Mexico City called Xochimilco, which is otherwise completely underwater. And that's probably, until I went to that graveyard in Chile, that would have been easily top of my list of the creepiest places I've ever been. There's nothing else I can really even think of that's comparable with that place. There's something about Latin America that seems to thrive on these kind of places.
Susan asks, do you think that you will ever reach the point of wanting to create, of not wanting to create your own music? Too much work, too much risk perhaps, and instead you will just carry on and doing production work for others?
It's something I could have easily done by now. I mean, I get a lot of requests for production and particularly mixing these days, and I turn down a lot of it, quite honestly, because I don't feel like I want to be distracted at this stage in my career from what I think I was put on this earth to do, which is to create my own music. But I would never say never, and there may come a point when I get to, retirement age, 65 or whatever, where I really don't fancy going out on the road again, and I really don't fancy the prospect of the blank page, which is a scary thing. The blank page for me is a scary thing, as I think it is for a lot of artists. How do you pluck something from the air that didn't exist before, make something from nothing? That's always a scary prospect. Part of me would be quite happy never to have to deal with that feeling ever again. Yeah.
All right, Sean asks, would you consider collaborating with Trent Reznor at any point?
I'd love to. Yeah. I think Trent, again, is one of my big sort of influences as a producer. I mean, I think he created a whole new kind of musical language. Well, I'm not sure he created it, because he certainly, borrowed a lot from so-called industrial music that had gone on before him, whether it was Throbbing Gristle or Ministry or Frontline Assembly. But I think he definitely took it sonically to a higher level, and I think he's another guy that I would put his records in the gold standard of production. Just sonically they are extraordinary, and I think he's one of the best producers that the last 25, 30 years have produced, no question.
Peter asks, if you weren't a producer or a musician, what kind of work would you like to do?
Well, my other passion was cinema, and when I was very young I did a lot of acting, and I'm only talking about in school and stuff, but I loved it. And I think that if I hadn't been, a musician, I would probably have hopefully got involved somehow in the world, either of directing or acting or something like that, something involved. Which I think my parents were lucky, because I definitely chose the lesser of two evils in their case. I could have either gone into acting or being a musician, and I think the world of acting is probably even scarier for a mum and dad. But probably that, if it hadn't been for music, that would have been my path, I suspect. Yeah.
John says, as a solo artist, you've stated multiple times that you like each of your works to be very different from each. However, if you could draw a straight line through all your albums, what would you say is a defining trait of your sound?
Wow, great question. I think I like the idea of the album as a kind of musical continuum or a musical journey, and that's a hallmark of all the records I've made. And that's why I talk about taking these songs out of context. For me, really just doesn't work, because even an album like To the Bone, which doesn't necessarily have a narrative to it, the way I've structured it is to be listened to as a kind of musical journey. And I think if I'm good at anything, and I don't think I'm good at everything, but if I am good at something, it's understanding how to sequence, a set of songs, to give them a kind of, internal architecture, or a kind of weight that they might not have if you listen to them out of context, which in a way is why I'm not really an artist made for the sort of playlist, generation, the streaming generation where you make playlists, because my records are made to be hopefully experienced in the same way that you would watch a movie from beginning to end, or the way you would read a book from beginning to end. I think that's probably fundamental to every single record I've ever made.
Fabrizio asks, what are the best locations, venues that you've played live in?
Well, the Royal Albert Hall is very special to me, obviously because you grow up, being in England, you grow up with the legend of the Albert Hall. It's the legendary venue in the UK. To have played it, and to have played it, when my mum and dad were able to. My dad unfortunately passed away, but he was able to see the first time I played there, which was the last Porcupine Tree show ever we did actually was at the Albert Hall, and for my dad to have been there with my mum was very special, and I actually I feel good on stage. And it's funny because sometimes great venues you still don't necessarily feel comfortable for somehow, relaxed somehow. Every show I've done at the Albert Hall, I've done 4 now, I felt so at home, and that's an important, that's a kind of magical space to be in when you're performing.
James asks, why did you become a vegetarian, and what would you say your favourite vegetarian dish is?
I became a vegetarian quite simply because I don't believe human beings have any right to eat animals, and I know that's not everyone agrees with that. I think the human race has evolved to the point where we don't need to eat animals, so therefore we have no right to eat animals. This argument that we're somehow part of the food chain doesn't work, because we've long since evolved to the point where we're no longer a part of the food chain. So we eat animals basically because we like it. It's not a good enough reason for me. So, I mean, listen, I'm not trying to be patronising or holier than that. I didn't become a vegetarian until I was in my 30s, so it took me a long time to get to that point. But I'm at that point now where I don't force my opinion on other people, but all catering, for example, on my tour is vegetarian, so I do force it onto the band and the crew when we're on tour. But actually they love it, because the point is these days good vegetarian food is amazing. We're not in the 70s anymore. I'm not in the 70s anymore. It was tough to get good vegetarian food in the 70s and 80s maybe, not anymore. Any Italian restaurant, any Indian restaurant, any Asian restaurant, fantastic vegetarian food. My favourite, I mean, I'm not vegan. I love cheese, which of course is an animal product, but only free range and organic sort of cheese and eggs and that kind of thing. And I love cheese. I love halloumi cheese, probably my favourite. Yeah.
All right. Helena asks, will there ever be a movie or a documentary again like Insurgentes? The film featured a lot of your opinions about the music industry during the time the film was made. But I think your opinions have changed in some way if we look at your stuff now, and so has the music industry.
It's amazing how much it has changed. I mean, that film documentary was only made less than 10 years ago, and the music industry is a completely different planet already. I mean, I was raging against, downloading then. Nobody downloads music anymore. It's all street, so that's how quickly the whole industry has changed. Personally, I prefer the world of streaming to downloading. At least there's a little bit more emphasis now on high quality, full resolution audio. You can stream full resolution audio from most of these websites, and you can listen to albums from beginning to end. I think there's a little bit more encouragement for people to do that. Would I make another documentary? I don't think so. I think that was an experiment. Mm-hmm. It was fun, we had fun doing it, and it was almost like a kind of surreal road movie. I think if I was going to do another movie, I would want to do a proper, a bit like I started out down the road with Deadwing, writing a script, actually doing a proper story with actors and try and do something like that. And never say never, I think that still could happen,
Stephen asks, can you share your thoughts on Spotify playlists as a tool for discovering music? Streaming services have elevated the primacy of songs over the album format by facilitating shareable playlists. What are the pros and cons of hearing a song in the context of a playlist mix as opposed to its original place on the album?
Well, we kind of already touched on this. I think playlists have their place. There is something. I used to make mixtapes when I was a kid, and there is something kind of fun, and there can be something quite creative about doing playlists as well. The juxtaposition of songs that weren't designed to go together can be quite creative. And I have a lot of fun. It's almost like when I was a kid, one of my fantasies was to be a DJ, have my own radio show. So it's almost like that. It's like tapping into that fantasy of being able to create your own radio show. And I have fun making my Spotify playlist. The problem I have with all these things is when it becomes so dominant that it's kind of pushed out the whole art of listening to records the way they were made to be listened. So it's like anything. I think as long as it has its place, playlists can work. Playlists can be creative. Playlists can be fun. A great way to discover new music. But I would still like to think that the other thing would prevail too. That people will still sit down and listen to records and kind of immerse themselves in an artist's, vision for the length, the duration of an album.
Yeah. Jonas asks, which performer/group has inspired your own live performances the most?
Oh wow! I think it's not really other musicians. It's filmmakers, and you have to remember a lot of these things I'm doing in the shows. I'm working with Lasse and I'm working with Jess, the animator, and we sit down. And when we sit down, we don't talk about music. We talk about film. So the aforementioned David Lynch obviously being a very important influence, but there's a lot of other reference points, and the more kind of cine literate people would probably see some of the things we've ripped off. The Harmony Korine video, for example, is full of homages to other movies, and there's a lot of that in the films we've created for the live show. So I think the honest truth is I don't go to a lot of live shows. It's a bit too much like going to the office for me. Yeah. So I don't see a lot of other bands doing this, But I know that, for example, Nine Inch Nails and Massive Attack have both used the transparent gauze in front, which is something I've used. But of course, it's all a question of what your content is. What kind of visuals are you actually projecting? And hopefully that was unique at least.
Nick asked, do you commonly set out to find inspiration for the lyrics in your work, or does the inspiration just seem to happen?
I think it's a bit somewhere in the middle, really. When I'm writing a new album, I guess I've got my antennae up, and I'm kind of aware that I need to find things to inspire me to write, but I don't force the issue. With Hand Cannot Erase, that whole story and that whole kind of concept was like a gift. I couldn't really have gone looking for it. It just came, one day, and it was just a beautiful gift that opened up into this whole concept that became a record, that became a blog, that worked into the artwork, into the website, into the live show. I couldn't contrive to find something like that again that was so perfect. It may one day come to me. So this time it was just more a case of being aware of what was going on in the world. And, when you sit down to write a song, and it happens to be the day after the Bataclan incident, for example, which I did start writing a song called People Who Eat Darkness, literally the day after that. And predictably and logically, the song became about, modern sort of terrorism. And I think that was only natural considering the kind of frame of mind that everyone was in at that time. So I'm not searching for these things, but I think these things are, if you're open and you're someone that's kind of, creative and channeling those things. And I've always written songs about what's going on the Earth, the planet Earth. It's natural that those things kind of manifest through the lyrics.
Mm-hmm. Olaf asks, have you visited the Pink Floyd exhibition in London?
I haven't. I went to the Bowie exhibition a couple of years ago. I'm slightly torn about these exhibitions. Is rock music really now something that's going into museums? To me, it's almost like the first nail in the coffin. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like people like Bowie and Floyd now and the Beatles now, they've become these kind of museum pieces. Although those artists don't exist anymore, and in one case aren't even alive anymore, I'm not sure that I'm ready to kind of consign them to the museum. I still think the music is very vital and it has a lot to say. It's still relevant now as it has ever been, perhaps even more so in the case of some of Bowie and Floyd's work. So I'm slightly torn on the whole exhibition thing. I'm not sure if I like the idea necessarily.
All right, Klaus asks, what projects will you work on from now until the tour starts next year, apart from obviously promoting the new album?
I've got to prepare for the live show, and as we talked about before, I need to start thinking about the live visuals and working with Lasse and Jess on those things, and that's a big job because we want to take the show up to a whole nother level. I've also got about 4 or 5 songs which are left over from the album, not because they're not good enough, but just simply because conceptually they just didn't quite fit in for me. and I'm not a fan of overlong albums. I wanted the album to be 60 minutes maximum, which is what it is. So I have these other songs which I want to finish off for a follow-up EP at some point, probably maybe in spring next year. So I'm going to carry on working on those. And the promotion. And to be honest, I think those three things between them will probably occupy a majority of my time.
Yeah. Should we take one more question?
Sure. Yeah.
So Sean says, a lot of your classic influences have been well documented, but are there any up-and-coming artists that inspire your music or at least give you hope for future generations?
Well, I think I'm really... The one thing that I'm really impressed by at the moment is the new generation of young classical composers. People like Max Richter, Nils Frahm, Johan Johansson. These guys who are essentially making traditional classical music, but they've grown up. They've grown up in the generation of electronic music, and they have kind of absorbed all those things too. So you hear the influence of electronic music, and you hear the influence of rock music, and you hear the influence of all this kind of different music that is very much of now or the last 20, 30 years, but sort of filtered through their classical music sensibility. And I'm a massive fan of Max Richter. I think his music is so beautiful. It's kind of simultaneously traditional, but also completely modern. And I think that's the trick that every musician kind of tries to pull off, really, because you can't make music that's completely original. Everything refers back to the past, whether you mean it to or not. Music doesn't come from a vacuum. It all refers back to the past in some way. The musical vocabulary is very much established. But when you hear something, as I do through Max Richter's music, when you hear something that kind of simultaneously sounds completely now, but also reminds you of things you've heard before in a kind of comforting way, that's really special. And I think he's an amazing composer, and I'm a big... The record he released this year, which is based on the writing of Virginia Woolf, I'd be surprised if there'll be an album this year that I liked more than that particular record.
Did you see the film Arrival?
I did, yes. And I know
it's
music.
got the Max Richter track, and it's got...
And Johan Johansson in it too, yes. Yeah. And those guys, they're doing a lot of movie soundtracks, which makes perfect sense to me, because it's so cinematic and so musically literate, yeah. So, yeah, I'm a big fan of those guys, and that's the scene that's kind of exciting me right now the most, I would say.
Yeah, very good. All right, I think that's everything.
Okay, over and out. Thanks for listening, guys. Thanks for the questions.